relationship stress travels with us to work, and work stress travels with us into our homes. So if I'm struggling in my relationship, it's going to compromise my productivity. And if I feel burned out, unappreciated, misunderstood, overwhelmed at work, it's going to come home and there's going to be fallout in my relationship.
That's psychologist Dr. Alexandra Solomon. I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better. Don't forget to hit that follow button to get new episodes of our show every week. And if you liked this episode or any others that you've heard, I have a favor to ask you. Consider leaving us a review so we can keep bringing you more conversations you love. If you don't know, here's how to leave a review. On Apple Podcasts, go to the Everyday Better page, scroll down to ratings and reviews, and click the number of stars you want to give us. Then, right below that, click Write a Review and add your note. On Spotify, go to our page, click the 3 dots next to the settings wheel, and select Rate Show. We so appreciate your feedback, and as always, thank you, thank you, thank you. Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better, a personal development podcast where every week I sit down with some of the world's brightest minds and bravest hearts who use science and story to share strategies for how we can flourish individually, in relationship to others, and to the world around us. If you're a regular listener of the show, you've probably heard me express my frustration that so many of these topics that we explore here, the tools and skills and research that help us live better, more fulfilling lives, aren't taught to us in school. And while I'm not turning my nose up at social studies, math, and science, I do wonder what the world would look like if middle and high school curriculum included classes on even just the 3 topics we've explored this month: how to handle stress, how to improve your sleep, and how to cultivate a healthy relationship with work. That's why I was really intrigued when I first heard about Marriage 101. It is the most popular course offered to undergrads at Northwestern, and it's taught by Dr. Alexandra Solomon, a couples therapist, podcast host, and an author. This spring will be her 25th year of teaching the course. And in it, students learn about the history of marriage and what the latest research says makes for long-lasting partnership. Dr. Alexandra Solomon is internationally recognized as one of the most trusted voices in the world of relationships. Her work focuses on what she calls relational self-awareness. Relational self-awareness is all about understanding the self in relationships. That is the baggage each of us brings to any relationship we enter. Our fears, our insecurities, the role we played in our family growing up, even the cultural and societal lessons we're taught about who we can become in the world. We may not have been taught how to have a thriving relationship in school, but we can learn these skills later on to help us form deeper connections. There was so much I wanted to talk about with Dr. Alexandra, but I am especially intrigued by her latest area of focus: how our work lives show up in our relationships. It's a topic that surprisingly hasn't received much clinical attention, but as a couples therapist, Alexandra's seen firsthand how we bring our work stress home with us and into our most important relationships. Whether you and your partner disagree about how much money you should each make, or how many hours you should work, or whether a career is about finding meaning or having financial security, this is fraught terrain. It's rife with opportunities for conflict. And as our societal norms about gender roles and work continue to shift, all of this gets even more complicated. So today on the show, Dr. Alexandra is helping us reset that same argument you and your partner have again and again about work. And stick around for another very special guest who will be joining us later in the episode. So let's dive in. Here's Alexandra.
The research is incredibly clear that the quality of our relationships is a massive determinant in the overall quality of our lives. And it's really exciting that the relationship science field is actually now, it's a mature science. There's decades now of research that shows that when we feel stuck and disconnected and in those god-awful circular conflicts again and again, it really erodes not just the quality of the relationship, but it actually erodes our own mental health and physical health. So we need to have tools to create ease and flow and connection so that we can enjoy each other, but also so that we can be as healthy on the inside as we can be. But it all ties back to relational self-awareness, which we'll get into, which is about helping people understand themselves better so that they can feel really authentic and whole in their relationships.
I think you and I probably have similar missions in the sense that my goal is to give people a better sense of self-awareness so that they can move around the world differently. I think when we each move around the world a little bit better, we become better for ourselves and each other, and we have a different view on the world. But most of us aren't incredibly self-aware, and most of us don't realize it's a skill. So that brings me to this question about your class, because you have this class that is one of the top classes that people like clamber for and probably wake up at 6 a.m. to register for, called Marriage 101. I would have been that student for sure if I were at North. Oh, 100%. Oh my God. Yeah. And it's fascinating, right? Because we go to school for all these different things. Like, you know, I've thought often about like, why was I in geometry when I could have been learning about like how to be a better person or how to be a better friend or how to think about my career? I feel like those are much more valuable skills than the ones we tend to get. So I was pleasantly surprised to know that your class, which is, you know, probably off the beaten path for a lot of the kids who register, is so popular. And I'm curious what you make of that.
Oh, it is. I mean, it's been such a special part of my year. And this spring, I will teach it for the 25th time. So this class has been around just about as long as my marriage. And this class has been around longer than my kids have been around. It's so funny. Like when I first taught it, you know, I looked a lot like kind of a cool older sister to my students. And now I look a lot like their moms. It's really so funny to have something that has traveled with you throughout your career like that. But it's the most popular class on campus. It has kind of a lore about it, you know. But it does also because, just to your point, it's meeting students where they are. I remember being a college student and sitting on the floor of the dorm room and just talking about relationship and family and just unpacking all of that. So it's meeting students in a developmental interest of theirs. And they also have understandable concerns. They've watched their parents struggle or go through a divorce or deal with infidelity. They've been inundated with media messaging. And this class is all about empowerment, like how empowering it is to feel like you've got some lenses now that you can look through where you can make sense of what's happening, the patterns, the dynamics, the choreography in a relationship, and where you then feel like, oh, when I do this differently, it invites something different to come forward in the other person. That's powerful.
It's incredibly powerful. And I think we're expected to just know that on our own. Then we wonder why people are in relationships that end up failing, which is kind of hilarious to think that we're just supposed to show up and do it.
Yeah. Right. By what means would you have learned that? Right. Our primary teachers are our parents. You know, I call that like our original love classroom is the home that we grew up in. And some of us grew up in homes when our parents were doing their own work as they were raising us. But for lots of us, you know, we didn't grow up with that kind of template or that modeling.
So when we think about your class, then what I'm getting from how you're explaining this is it feels kind of like a living lab. They can do their own research and then go look at how things are going in their lives and actually make a change within 10 weeks, which I just don't think is really accessible to so many people. And that's part of the reason I wanted to have you come on the show. And one of the things that you've mentioned already that you focus on is relational self-awareness. So for people who don't know, what is that?
It's my distillation of my decades of being immersed in the research and the clinical wisdom, right? So I stand on the shoulders of giants. I have been well taught and well trained for many, many years. So I have pulled together a set of frameworks that are distilled from what we know from the science, which is that the strongest foundation for an intimate relationship is that ability to keep yourself in the equation. I call it the golden equation of love. My stuff plus your stuff equals our stuff. We know that we're not honoring the golden equation of love when one of two things is present: blame and shame. Right? Because blame is that finger pointy, like this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't done that. Like that hot potato thing that couples so often get
I'm
into.
laughing because we'll have something to talk about later.
Okay. Put a pin in that. And then shame is the It's my stuff. I'm too broken. It's because of my family dynamics. It's because of my struggle with addictions. Like my stuff is the problem here. And shame is like that little hall of mirrors. We can't be relational and in shame at the same time. So both of those things, blame and shame, take us out of that really juicy middle space, which is the more I do this, the more you do that. And the more you do that, and the more I do this. Damn, like the ability to see the cycle and the pattern and the way that we lose each other in that back and forth. And that's what people need to have a high quality, sustainable relationship.
You're reminding me, and I don't think Tim will be mad at me to share this, but he's a very funny, silly, humorous person. And so am I. But at the beginning of our relationship, he would poke fun at little things that I had never had anybody poke fun at before in my life. And it hurt at first because I would just shut down. I would go straight into shame and go, oh my God, he thinks that I'm really X or really Y. And for him, it was a joke because he's much better at laughing at himself than I am. So I would go into I feel ashamed and I'm blaming him. And so I realized over time, God, this is actually just me pointing this thing at myself instead of being able to kind of stay open and laugh at myself. And that shifted so much. So really it was my learning that God, I can take myself so seriously and also put shame on myself so quickly without realizing it. And then I'm pointing the finger at someone who's, wanting to have fun and probably also show me that I can lighten up.
Right. And that he can see your imperfections and love you, not despite them, but love you with them, right? That all of your little quirky edges are part of what endears you to him. It's so liberating. It's so liberating. I have a very similar dynamic in my marriage. My husband we've been married for 26 plus years, and he has this thing he calls the alley tax. In my home life, I'm Allie, not Alexandra. And the alley tax is all the stuff I do, tell him I'm going to give him a receipt. I don't give him a receipt, and it's just sort of the alley tax is the price he pays for loving me, and I think
Tim will resonate with that.
Yeah. The Leah tax. He's thinking, what are all the ways he pays the Leah tax?
Correct.
Yeah. But I think early in our marriage, very similar to you. I grew up deeply believing that I had to be perfect in order for my family to be okay. The oldest daughter, tons of pressure on myself to just shine. And I had cut myself very, very little slack. And that's not sustainable in a marriage because your partner has a front row seat to all of our quirks. But it has been really healing for me in our marriage to be able to own up to my mistakes, to be able to say, I get why that didn't land well for you, or just to laugh at myself a little bit more than I could before.
Oh my God, all that resonates. I don't think I felt pressure growing up to be perfect, but at some point, maybe into early adulthood, I started noticing things about myself that I wanted to change. And that can be really good. And then that can tilt into this, so much is wrong with me. And so I remember my therapist, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago said, she's like, I think you are trying to be ready-made before you ever meet anyone. And you're making up this myth that in order to meet someone, you have to be perfect. And also, you're using perfection as a way to protect yourself. Mm-hmm. Because then when I'm ready, everything will be perfect also. It's all about control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's no heartbreak. There's no pain.
There's no heartbreak. Yeah. Everything's going to be great. Yeah.
It makes me think of a slide that I show in the first day of Marriage 101, which is a slide with 2 circles. And there's one circle says relational self-awareness, and the other circle says romantic relationship. And it is the case that the more relationally self-aware we are, the better situated we are to draw towards us a partner who's really going to suit us well and create a healthy relationship. But the arrow goes the other way too. There is no such thing as the perfect amount of therapy, the perfect number of podcasts to listen to, so that there is no pain. Because there's some stuff, frankly, in our own evolution that we can't access until we're in partnership. It is the process, to your example about you and Tim. It was the process of loving Tim and being loved by Tim and Tim's humor that highlighted for you this dynamic, this tendency of yours. There's just some stuff we can't access until we're in relationships. So I want people to hold on to that really gentle awareness that yes, there is stuff we can do, but we're never going to be ready-made.
I didn't believe that. I was like, how many books can I read?
Yes, me neither.
So for anyone listening,
I will do therapy until my therapist puts a gold star on my forehead and tells me I'm like good to go.
Ready to go. Yeah. Ships you off.
Right. That's right.
So most people, Alexandra, with the work you've been doing, most people would not think about the fact that there is an intersection between relational self-awareness and our work lives. How did you get to a point where you were like, these two things have an intersection that I have to share?
Okay, there's two things I want to share briefly. One is that there's a ton of research that shows that relationship stress travels with us to work and that work stress travels with us into our homes. There's research that supports both directions. So if I'm struggling in my relationship, it's going to compromise my productivity. And if I feel burned out, unappreciated, misunderstood, overwhelmed at work, it's going to come home and there's going to be fallout in my relationship. So that's one piece is that there's a pretty semi-permeable boundary between those worlds anyways. But the one that really cemented it for me is when you think about a workplace, it's a system. There's multiple people in relationship with each other. Well, what else is a system? Your family of origin was a system. So I think there are really important avenues of exploration for people. When you think about your relationship with your boss, or your supervisor, it's going to activate in you the dynamics you had in the relationship with your parents. The pull for perfectionism, the need to fix, the overfunctioning, whatever the dynamic was with you and your parents is going to get triggered or activated or awakened in your relationship with your boss. When you think about your relationship with your coworkers, your peers, that's going to activate stuff that relates to your siblings, the competition, the comparison, the what's my role here? How do I belong, but also shine? And then when you become a supervisor, Lord help us, as you take on leadership, that then awakens all of the stuff that you may carry around power. If you are somebody who grew up in a family where you saw power not handled lovingly and gently, you're going to carry some fear of making other people feel small or abusing power or misusing power. So that to me is okay, there's some deep, serious, old stuff that gets activated in us. And it's not just my coworkers driving me crazy. It's also, okay, why? Not that it's all my fault, not that I'm misperceiving the dynamic, but the dynamic is informed, at least in part, by my stuff. My stuff plus your stuff equals our stuff.
Do you have questions that you have people ask themselves just in this idea of work or in the world of work when it comes to how we're showing up or things that are being triggered?
As people step into this kind of self-inquiry and self-reflection, it just means that moments need to be handled more slowly, So the most important practice, I think, is noticing when we go from calm to tense, activated, and urgent, and starting to learn when you make that shift is the first step. Then the second step is being let me pause here. There's so much urgency in workplaces, and I think that doesn't really benefit any of us. But I think especially when we're starting to get fired up or urgent or frantic, that's when we want to just pause and step away and start to look at what's going on inside of me that may be about a little more than just the project at hand. But those questions can't happen. I mean, I can't do it, at least. I can't in real time handle a difficult interaction and check in with myself about what might be getting stirred up. It's too much. So that pause, that let me get back to you, that I need a moment is so important.
Which is also so hard, but I guess so hard if you're fully plugged into the system of work where it's everything has to be urgent. Every decision has to be made in the moment. We get a lot of pressure to be immediate because that is what signals to people that we're productive and we're doing our work well. So it's sort of like an act of defiance to decide to wait, 24 hours and to see how that goes with your team or your boss. I'm curious, when you see someone shift at work, or have seen yourself shift at work, what changes? What becomes possible when you start investigating and interrogating this stuff?
Well, one thing is we end up with fewer messes to clean up, interpersonal messes or even project messes. When we're on autopilot, we end up creating messes that then we have to clean up. We say stuff like to your point about the subversiveness of saying, I'll get back to you, we also value, similar to this, like shooting from the hip, talking straight, telling it like it is. That is sort of seen, especially here in the US, as like a value, And when we shoot straight and talk from the hip, it's oftentimes a reactive young part of us that's at the wheel, frankly. So I think what the shift is, that deepened sense of pride, that I feel more aligned on the inside. I have fewer times where I put my foot in my mouth. I have fewer times where I have to figure out either whether to repair or how to repair. There's an exhaustion that can set in when you feel like you're sort of at the mercy of everything around you and even like your own words and actions. There's an exhaustion that can set in.
When we think about this intersection of work and our relational self-awareness, I'm curious how that shows up for couples at home in the sense of what are the main things that they're fighting about or arguing about, and what are we really arguing about?
Yeah. We talk about, as couple therapists, there's sort of like the manifest content, so a couple is fighting about money, or they're fighting about hours at work, or they're fighting about, the type of job that a person has, right? But then what are the layers underneath? A fight that's about hours at work is more deeply about a yearning for togetherness, perhaps a loneliness. And when couples get stuck in the content, you worked this many hours, no, I didn't, or I had to because of this, when couples are going back and forth about the sort of specifics or the details, what's getting missed is that deeper layer, of I miss you, I miss us, I'm craving something different than what we're doing right now. So I think that's what I want couples to be savvy about is, when there's a complaint that you're leveling about your partner's job, about your partner's paycheck, about your partner's hours, can you move from the complaint to the unmet need, the vulnerable share, the kind of deeper question or emotion that's going on?
That's also so resonant. Something I've heard you say I think is impactful here too. So we have gotten married a little bit older. We're having kids a little bit older, which is happening, obviously all over the place, a lot in large cities. You talk about this idea of marriage being a merger versus a startup when, potentially when you're older or when you're more established. I'm curious, in this day and age, and with the fact that we're all getting, a little bit older, taking a little more of our time, what do you see shift?
Just to make sure that we give credit where credit is due, that merger versus startup is something that I heard from Logan Ury, who is a dating and relationship coach and expert. And I think it's just it's so real and it's so resonant. Yeah, and it's another case where there's no right and there's no wrong. There actually isn't a ton of data that supports older age of entry into marriage means a more successful marriage. Sometimes it's like 18, 19, 20-year-olds do have a bit of a higher risk of divorce, but, much past that, there's not a ton of evidence that shows later is better, earlier is better. But you're right, folks are getting married much later than they used to. And that does mean that there are dogs involved and homes involved. And it means what comes up for couples then are things around accommodation. Like, how do I get used to your way of doing things and how do you get used to my way of doing things? And so what I want people to keep an eye out for is what are the feelings attached for you to accommodation? And I think especially for cis hetero couples, women can understandably get very, very sensitive about what they quote unquote give up or what they accommodate in order for the relationship. Because in many, many of our minds, we can look at generations of women that we saw in our family systems who were just depleted, who were like invisible, had rendered themselves invisible by all of the caretaking and all of the bending and flexing that they did for everybody else. So I see a lot of sort of younger, career-oriented, ambitious, later to married women being really concerned of like, I have to do everything the same way I always have done it because otherwise, it ends up feeling like very binary. Like if I don't keep my life exactly as it was before you entered it, it means I become my invisible mom. And there are so many shades of gray between like hyper independence, samey same, now that you're here, and disappearing altogether. But when I have a cis hetero couple, I find myself oftentimes talking to him about the gender loading, because it oftentimes just isn't something that he's aware of, you know? His cultural socialization is a bit different around all of that.
I feel like you're seeing into my soul, so thank you. You've said so many things. I'm like, yep, that happened.
And also that.
Yeah. Coming up, I welcome a very exciting guest into our conversation. Okay, fine, I'll tell you. It's my husband. Yes, that's right. After the break, my husband Tim joins Dr. Alexandra and me to chat about how our orientations towards work show up in our love lives. We'll be back in just a few minutes. And we're back with Dr. Alexandra Solomon for a very special moment on the podcast. You ready?
Sure.
You nervous?
I don't know.
Okay, so we're here with Tim.
We're here. Hi.
We're here. Hilarious. We've never been on a podcast together.
Ever.
Here we are. Okay, so Tim, to start, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Tim. Hi. I am Leah's husband, which is a new development in our life, calling myself her husband, which I like a lot. On the work side of my life, I would be called an entrepreneur. I own a company that provides Broadway experiences. So sometimes it's an experience on a sidewalk. We do tours of the theater district. Sometimes it's a tangible experience. I own a gift shop where we hand make souvenirs celebrating my industry. And other times it's a human experience where we work with people and artists in shows, understanding the human side of this kind of crazy theatrical industry that I'm a part of. My background is in singing and dancing. I did that for most of my 20s, and so I translated that into this business. I still dabble a little in singing and dancing, but it's more business in my life.
It's in the shower.
Yes, it's a lot of at-home singing in the shower these days.
When you become a dad, all that singing and dancing is going to be so valuable.
That is, story time is going to be full of voices. It's going to be great.
You're going to kill it.
So that's me.
Wait, I want to hear your origin story. I want to hear how the two of you met. I love to hear the love stories.
Okay, who's taking this, me or you?
You can start. Let's see how you do.
I think we'd have the same version of it. As anyone who's a small business owner knows, you spend a lot of time with your staff and only your staff because you do everything. And so in the pandemic, my staff was like, you will never meet anyone because you work all the time. And so they're like, go online date, do that thing, which I don't know. I just felt, it felt so cold. It felt impersonal, but I was like, yeah, you're right. Maybe that's the only way, especially in a global pandemic, to do that. And so I downloaded Hinge, was the app of choice. And one of my first matches, I think, was you. Certainly my first Hinge date was Leah.
Wow.
And I walked up and was like, well, that was easy. Is this what it is? Is this online dating? You just walk up and they just like pick the perfect person for you?
You are the app's nightmare. You did not, they made
Exactly.
no profit off of you.
Correct.
You're
They
the
were
worst
like,
customer.
when we said app to be deleted, we didn't mean
Actually.
this fast. This, you were not supposed to just one and done. But it was one and done. We met. I think instantly it felt different than other dates I'd been on. And so from there, it was just kind of like all in instantly. I had no reservations. She's pretty easy to love, and it's been pretty amazing.
He's going to make me cry. I would add, when you're a small business owner and you put owner as your as your description on Hinge, some women might be scared off. I was like, what does this person own? Because if you're in my world in tech, it's like everyone's an entrepreneur and owner. But I did, the second I saw him, I was like, oh, who is that? Like, that was the first question I had. And I was like, okay, I have to reach out to this person directly and like, we have to talk.
And I should interject that I don't know how to do the apps because I had never done them. So I instantly was like, I don't really use this. Can we just text? And
which
she
is,
was like,
again, another creepy
that's a red
signal.
flag.
Nice.
She's like, that's red flag in this world. She was like, you're not supposed to do that. And I was like, I will never talk to you again because I only know how to text. And so I did everything wrong. So it was all red flags that are now green.
Good for Leah to just flag, but not have her not walk away. I think that's an important lesson. I think there are times when I have to coach people to just take a breath. Not everything is a red flag that means you ought to walk away. Sometimes it can just be a So Leah stayed with her
I sure did.
Okay.
And I'm so glad I did. And then we met within the first 20 minutes. I looked at him and I was like, we have to see each other again. And like, that is so not me. I'm not the person who's like, I go after people. And it was like from my gut. It was like, oh, no. Like this, I have to say this. And he was like, so is this date over? I was like, no, we still.
Is this
I was
internet
like,
dating? You
I
just
want
decide. Do now we go away and come
I'm
back?
closing the deal now.
Can we just
and then we keep going. So that was our, that was
God.
our first part of our story. And so then from there, it's been very like all in. There were no questions. I used to say to my girlfriends when they'd ask how it was going, I was like, no notes.
I appreciate you sharing your story. I think there's so many little like things that it's making me think of, but I think that what the two of you are modeling more than anything is to just like let your outsides match your insides. I think there's so much gamesmanship and rules and do this and don't do that. And you guys you really didn't follow the rules in all of the best ways. Like you let him know that you liked him and that you wanted this to continue.
Okay, so Alexandra, we have obviously told you the story of how we met, and we're two people who we both really value the work that we do. I'd consider myself to be, I work at a corporation, but I also feel like an entrepreneur because I built the show from scratch. While Tim is someone who's like, he got here to New York when he was 18, wanted to become an actor, and was like, wait a second, I also want to be able to live here and make some amount of money. And so he built his business, and over 14 years has been, obviously incredibly dedicated and built something amazing, which means we are two people coming together who care a lot about our work. When I thought about some of your conversations around, or what you've been researching around couples, you've made up these imaginary couples, these different profiles of people who are oriented toward work in different ways or oriented toward ambition in different ways. I'm curious for us to walk through this a bit because I want people to be able to hear what these kind of matchups look like and how it might be playing a role in their relationship that they don't realize when it comes to work and partnership. So we're starting with the slasher and the traditionalist. I'm curious why that dynamic matters and who those people are.
Yep. So the slasher and the traditionalist are when people come together around, it is the two of you definitely fit into this one in that Leah is a traditionalist. She has one workplace that she goes to. She has sort of like one full-time, paid position in a larger company. That's a more traditional form of work. And Tim fits more into that slasher category, and slasher, not like a serial killer, but a slasher.
I was going to say, does it have to sound so negative?
The slash is like the little diagonal line that goes between performer slash business owner slash, and it actually comes from a book that was written a number of years back, which sort of highlighted the fact that in this era of, with all the technology we have where people can set up their own small business much more easily than they used to be able to, it means that there are many, many more people who are doing this blend of I'm a coach and a business owner and a performer and a. There's oftentimes a few different revenue streams, a few different hats that are worn. And it just seems to be the case that oftentimes the slashers find the traditionalists and the traditionalists find the slashers. And for each of these types that we're going to talk through, there are challenges about that combination, but there's also what I call the power couple potential for each of these combinations. So the power couple potential here, and you guys don't fit super neatly because Leah, to your point, like you get to have all this creativity and autonomy, but there's a kind of complementarity that happens when couples have both the security and the stability of a traditional job and the kind of creativity and possibility of more of a slasher career trajectory.
I mean, we talk about that a lot, like the fact that we're not two people who are trying to figure it out. I also think the reason we were like, oh, are you, to me, I'm like, I know you have your own business, but I don't think of you as a slasher. But maybe that's in the sense of the fact that like, he's been doing this for so long. So by the time we met, he might have felt like a slasher 12 years ago, but today you don't, to me.
Yeah, listening to you guys talk in your first segment about money and how much stability you have and being the perfect version of yourself. And now I'm ready to date. I very much felt that in the 20s. I remember saying to an ex-girlfriend that I was like, we can't really get married yet because I don't have enough money to do the ring and buy the house and have kids and support you because I'm still doing this like part-time hustle and singing and dancing. And a lot of theater people, because our industry is so niche in some ways and just insane, a lot of people date and stay within that industry because there's this feeling of no one else can understand me because of the narrow kind of silo of what I'm trying to do. And it's why I was so resistant to dating anyone outside of our industry for 20 years. And then the first person I do, you're like, oh, you can, one, be understanding, two, bring other really unique, interesting, stable things to the table. And it's fun to come home and talk about work and have someone be like, tell me more about that because I don't really know what you mean.
Yeah.
And vice versa for both of us. And so that kind of variety has been a really welcome addition to my life and this relationship. And it's provided us a lot of opportunities to share our work. And I think that's added a lot to our enjoyment of the city and of each other and our lives.
I have that similarly in my marriage with Todd. He's been a corporate attorney at the same law firm, throughout. We got married and he started at the law firm like the following week, and he has not changed careers. So he's a super duper traditionalist and I'm definitely a slasher. But it's interesting, Tim, you're speaking to the role of admiration and how when the two of you come together and give each other windows into your worlds, like your sense of admiration like comes through loud and clear in the way the two of you talk to each other and about each other. And admiration is a huge part of a healthy relationship, and being able to admire your partner's work, even if it's very different than yours. Like there are times when I really try to keep up with my husband's, some aspect of my husband's work. And even though it's so different than mine, I admire how he does it. And I want to understand it more deeply because it's so different than mine. And it's so much a part of what fills his time and so much of what, frankly, has made the life that we have possible,
Yep.
Yeah, when this idea of like, come on my podcast and let's do this thing. And I was like, as long as it doesn't turn into couples therapy, I'm on board. That sounds great. But it's the first kind of 45 minutes of watching the two of you talk. There's like this really deep pride where you're like, oh, look at these two incredible humans having this conversation. I only get to hear about them once I'm at home. But it's another thing to be a fly on the wall and kind of watch it happen and be in the room. I don't know that I'm recommending everyone have like bring your spouse to work day, but it's like, why is it only bring your kid to work today? Why can't there be a day where we all get to go to our person's work and like literally just sit and watch them work? Maybe it's weird, but
damn, look at you. Look what you're doing, running the show. Oh, that's so true.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I feel when I go on your tours. And it helps me see a different side that does add a lot of admiration. And it's, you're not the person that I'm watching Handmaid's Tale with. You're actually the person who's like running his business and doing this. And I'm like, oh man, that's power.
That's hot.
That's cool. Yeah, exactly. That's it. Yeah.
I mean, like bottom line.
Correct.
So much better than Handmaid's Tale.
It's better than Handmaid's Tale, not hot. I think one of the things that you and I understand about each other is a sense of entrepreneurialism, which makes it much easier, I think, for us to sort of be on an equal playing field. Even though I'm technically a traditionalist, I get the slasher and I recognize how that's shown up for me. I'm curious, Alexandra, though, as we talk about this particular dynamic, and for people who are listening and going, yep, that's me, we're the slasher and traditionalist, you talked about the power couple potential, but I'm also curious about what the risk is here.
Yeah. Well, the risk for all these couples is polarization, that the traditionalist feels like I'm carrying all of it and nobody appreciates what I do, or they feel envy, envy that like my partner's pursuing their dreams and I don't get to pursue my dreams because I got to just punch in and punch out. And for the slasher, the risk, the kind of polarized part is feeling a fear of being a chronic disappointment. Like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not contributing enough. I don't have a job that is worthy of admiration. So those are the risks that happen there. And so that's why I want to like name all of that and help people also like be able to tap into what's really beautiful and possible. Like that's the whole point of a relationship, is that you get all the bases covered. You get more coverage around all the different ways of being a human when you partner, because we invariably partner with people who are different from us. So can you notice the resentment that you start to feel or the judgment you start to make? And can you, again, speaking to the first part of our conversation, can you get curious about it? If there's a traditionalist who's judgy of their slasher partner because, well, they get to follow their dreams. Okay, then what is your lost dream? What do you need to reclaim? Maybe it doesn't mean quitting your job, but maybe it means you take a dance class at night. You take a painting class on Saturday morning. What is the part of you that you're losing sight of? Not because of your partner. Your partner's just mirroring it for you, So I think that's where we need to go, is like, rather than getting stuck in the criticism and judgment, to get curious about, where do I go with it? I'm judging my partner in this way. What do I need to do for myself?
In the next category, you talk about coaster and climber. Can you talk about that? And I mean, for me, this feels really obvious with how resentment could come up, but I'm curious what the pitfall is here.
Okay. So our coaster climber couple, we've got one person, the climber, who is like, they get the promotion and they like drink one glass of champagne and then they're figuring out what the hell next promotion they're going to go for. They publish one book and they got the proposal ready for the next one. Yes. So they're just like, they're voracious. They are led by ambition and the new challenge and the next like up level, the next iteration. And our coaster is like, they're just fine. They're enjoying what they're doing. They're just kind of like riding the wave. They're not looking for the next thing. And so, right, the resentment is, in the worst case scenario, the coaster judges the climber. Like, can you just please take a breath? And can you please divert some of that energy toward us, toward our family, toward whatever? And the climber is looking at the coaster like, I want to light a fire under your butt. Like, you haven't had a raise in this many years. You haven't had a promotion this many years. There's judgment. There's maybe a struggle with admiration in the polarized version of this.
Do you notice that there is a difference in cis-hetero relationships of which person is the coaster versus climber?
Well, certainly, I think in a cis-hetero couple, the way that patriarchy has taught us to be, right, is that we are constantly teaching men to keep going, keep striving, bigger paycheck, more. And we teach women to feel, I was in a conversation yesterday where somebody had been a woman had been directly told by an elder in her family, like, you got to watch that ambition because it's going to drive men away. So I think women have been taught that their ambition is dangerous and their ambition has the risk of pushing men away or intimidating men. So I think there for sure are some gendered layers there.
Yeah, that was my first thought, was like, I feel that sense of, even though I am I think inherently tenacious and ambitious when I find the right thing, is like, generally we've been told that the man at the very least is supposed to be a climber. And if he's not, there's something unattractive about that. And I think men have been told like, oh, it's totally fine if, in a cis-hetero relationship, your wife is the coaster, and sometimes even expected or is most comfortable for them because that's what they've seen modeled for a long time.
Mm-hmm. And there's the economic reality, which is the data shows now that in one half of cis-hetero couples, she out-earns him. And in the other half, he out-earns her. So that is new. That was not true even a generation ago. So this generation of couples was not, by and large, not raised by families where that was modeled. And it does not matter who earns more money, right? It is just money. It is just dollars and cents that go to support lifestyle. But my gosh, we have tons and tons of layers of meaning that we import onto paychecks and worthiness and power and gender and all that stuff. So it's very loaded.
Maybe this is just because everything I've done has been non-traditional in my career, but this idea of this traditional, like, you're just going to be at home, I'm going to make more money, was never really attractive to me. Like, I was always like, I want someone who's like showing up to the world and like also voracious. And so the idea of that traditional kind of, this is what the man does, this is what the woman does, I don't know, that was never really attractive to me.
Yeah, I can remember I had like my second speaking event when we were first dating, and I sent him a picture, and he was like, oh, I love this. And I was like, is he serious? And I messaged him back. I was like, really? And your response was like, yeah, let's take over the world. And I was like, oh, he means it, And so it was a really cool feeling to be like, oh, all right, let's do it. So talk to me about the coaster and climber and the potential for these two.
Yeah. So the power couple potential is that they hold on to this like beautiful both and of being and becoming. You know, as human beings, we need both of those energies. The energy of becoming, it's beautiful to keep evolving, to keep pushing, to keep iterating. That's a quality of aliveness. But then the being is really essential. We talked before about your meditation practice, right? Like just being able to be in this moment right here, right now. So in that way, again, they multiplied life by the power of two, to quote the Indigo Girls, and they've got the capacity to cover all those areas. You know, the climber is reminding us, like, let's keep visioning. What's next? What can we do? And the coaster is reminding them, like, let's just stop and smell the flowers and let's just really savor where we are right now. So that's the beauty of that complementarity.
And I will say, as we were talking about this, we were trying to kind of put ourselves in the shoes of this couple. I said to my producers, oh, if we were each one of these, I'd be the coaster and Tim would be the climber. And Grace and Emily were like, what are you talking about?
You don't coast.
They're like, you're not coasting. I was like, well, I guess in relation to the ambition I felt before, something shifted. But they were like, actually, I think what it is that in relationship to each other, you feel like more of the coaster because you're in a more traditional job, because you're not in the moment fighting for that next thing, which is like, as soon as you describe the climber, I'm like, yes, that's very me. I'm like, what's next? But the fact that like, even in some of these, in these dynamics, we can sort of like move into a role and or like identify more in a role depending upon how the other person shows up.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, so in the third couple, you talk about the meaning maker versus the money maker. This sounds obvious, but what does it actually look like and how does it manifest?
Yeah, the meaning maker. So there's some research a while ago that came up with a kind of 3 different work orientations that some of us have jobs, some of us have careers, and some of us have callings. And there's actually no evidence that there are better and worse ways to do it, right? A job is like you punch in, you punch out, you get your money, and you derive meaning and purpose elsewhere. A career it's kind of bound up more with progress and ambition and growth. And then a calling is that there is just like the Venn diagram between your work and yourself is just a big old circle, you know? And that's what I'm getting at here is sometimes we come together across those differences where a meaning maker more likely is in that calling where there's just a ton of overlap between self and work. Then the moneymaker, you know, there's not a ton of overlap. It's like, I have a job, but then you also need to know about 8 other things about me if you really are going to understand who I am.
You know, it's funny. I always assumed that it was the most like valiant way was the calling. And I used to always, especially when I first started the show and when I felt like I found more of my purpose, I was like, oh, everyone needs to find it. And it's probably at work. And it took me a while to like undo all of that. And a lot of interviews and a lot of reading to go, okay, I feel really fortunate that that's what I found. I think that was really important for me, but not everyone has that same experience. And I think for both of us, we're actually meaning makers in the sense that like those Venn diagrams are fully, they're like right on top of each other.
Yeah.
Like it couldn't get much closer for either of us, even though we're in different worlds. But one thing I noticed, at first I was like, oh, I wonder if Tim's kind of also the moneymaker. And for anyone listening, this may be interesting for you to consider too, is our orientation toward the fact that money is also related to security and the importance of security, where like a value of mine, you know, in my 20s and into my 30s was not security. It was freedom. It was experience. It was adventure. So for Tim, you know, security is incredibly important. So we have different orientations, I think, around money. And that's where I was like, oh, maybe he's more of the moneymaker in that sense because that matters so much to him. But it's not that it doesn't matter to me. It's just maybe we think about it differently. So I'm curious if you've seen that too.
Absolutely. I mean, I talk about something that I call like financial self-awareness. You know, we've been talking about all these different facets of self-awareness. And I spend time with couples kind of unpacking their money story, you know, because there's so many things that we observed growing up, like how our parents talked about money, the ties that they had around money. So I think it's really important for couples not just to talk about budgets and goals, you know, like money is because it's so dollars and cents. I think it's easy to get kind of locked into the budgetary stuff, which is certainly important, but also to dig into the psychology of money, you know, how does money tie to like worth, not just like financial worth, but like self-worth and power, which are, by the way, evolving. My husband and I are empty nesters now, and he's got his eye on retirement, which I can even barely say out loud, how are we here? So there's different conversations about money now that we're in our early 50s than there were when we were in our 20s and 30s and 40s together.
Yeah. And as you talked about, there's potential for this couple too. If you're finding yourself in this position, what happens when these two reach their potential together?
Mm-hmm. Well, here, I think there's just a beautiful opportunity to honor both ways of being, to honor what it means to truly live your calling, to really merge your identity with your purpose, with your job. And then there's also the possibility of to really celebrate, how cool that you spend X number of hours in your day doing this. And then you have all these other facets that make up who you are. So just being able to hold on to that by having this difference in their relationship, they're gifted with the opportunity to let go of the judgment about better and worse ways of being. And I think whenever we can do that, in our partnership, it's oh my God, thank goodness you're different from me in this way, because in our difference, I get a chance to free myself up of this idea that there's a hierarchy and ways of being a human, and I get to be celebratory. And if I can do that with you, I can do it with our neighbors and my mom and the kids that we have someday. How important is that?
Where my mind went when we first started talking about this is on my tours of the theater district, we get people from all over the world. You're making small talk in between theaters as you're talking and walking. And I had this British couple and I said, can I ask what you guys do for work? And I forget what they said. The point of it was, and I said, and do you enjoy it? And they said, what? And I said, do you enjoy your work? And they said, oh, that's such an American way of looking at your work. That's we just work. We just work. I don't know. You have your job and then you have your life outside of work. And they're it's the American dream idea of your work is your life. Ooh. They're we don't really think like that. And I was what? What do you mean?
The record scratch.
Correct. I was what could you mean? And they were and it's wonderful to see someone like yourself who is so passionate about their work and their humanity, but
also maybe get a life.
Right.
Exactly. But they were also what do you do outside of work? I was what does this
What does that mean?
What is this? What do you mean work-life balance?
You mean bedtime?
Yeah.
Sleep?
Correct. I walk my dogs. Is that what you mean? And so, that the idea that money isn't tied to your meaning, which is tied to your work, is a concept that I will never understand, but apparently there's people out there that is their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's totally fine.
And they all live in London.
Yeah, and they all live in London. So I'm curious, Alexandra, as we were talking about this, I know that it's powerful for couples when it comes to work to talk about work stress specifically, to talk about challenges, and not necessarily for the purpose of problem solving, but just to be able to maybe quiet the noise that comes up when you are stuffing some of that stress down and then it pops up elsewhere when you're having dinner and you're mad about something else. But is there something healthy about, just not talking about the work itself at all? And I asked this in the sense that, Tim, and this is no shade on you, but he doesn't listen to podcasts. And so he doesn't listen to my show. I don't listen to every single thing he does. He's active on social media. I'm not as active, so I don't see his updates all the time. Have you noticed that there's anything, even in your own relationship or in others, that is healthy or unhealthy about talking about the content of the work you're doing?
Right. I think this is a huge question, but I think the most important thing to say here is that it's not whether or not you talk about your workday, it's how you talk about it. And I think what ends up being a drain for couples is when the narrative is the litany of complaints, of this sucked and this sucked and this sucked and this sucked. And if a couple is going to do that, if they're going to kind of use each other as a place to vent, which is so understandable, they need to also agree to something that in the therapy world we call stroke, kick, where it's I affirm you, I empathize with you, I validate you, and then I ask you okay, so what do you want to do about it? Or what's your part of it? Or how can it be different? Because I think what gets tiring for couples is when one of them feels like they have to be sort of the forever receptacle of their partner's work complaints that never change and they're never different and it's every day the same thing. And so if there is a partner who's, perhaps venting in a way that's not a vent and then help me think about this differently. What I want to say to that partner is, who else can be your safe place to vent? Because you're asking a lot of this relationship right now, right? Is it a therapist? Is it a friend? So I think that's where I think couples get into trouble, is when the conversation just feels like it's a, that like litany of complaints, and that person who's complaining is not open to feedback or is not also resourcing themselves elsewhere.
Yeah, it's just like you come home and just you're just dumping everything, and it's, okay, there, I feel better. But you never think about the other person. Just like, yeah, but I just received all of that. What about me? And you're like, well, there, I got it off my chest. What are we having for dinner? Yeah. I never really thought about, now I'm thinking, God, how much do I come home but I think, I don't know, I think
that's
we're pretty.
For couples therapy.
Yeah, it was like that.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was like that. So.
She takes our insurance.
Correct, exactly.
I'm not kidding. All right, Alexandra, I'm going to have you complete these 3 statements for me. Better humans are
willing to hold up a mirror and look at themselves.
Nice. Better work is
work that has boundaries around it and leaves breathing room for other parts of life.
Thank you for that. We probably both do that. And a better world has
space for all kinds of ways of being a human.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here, Alexandra, and thank you, Tim.
Yes.
For being a specimen.
Thank you for having me.
So fun, both of you.
It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and come do it again.
Absolutely.
We can't
Part
wait.
2. I've got a list of questions that we didn't even get to.
Oh boy. Maybe we won't record that one.
Yeah.
That was Dr. Alexandra Solomon, a psychologist and professor at Northwestern University and the host of Reimagining Love. Thank you again to my husband, Tim Dolan, for being so vulnerable by agreeing to come onto the pod. And if you liked this conversation, text it to the first person who comes to mind. It might be just what they needed to hear. Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Grace Rubin and Emily Reeves. Asaf Gadrone is our sound engineer. Tim Boland mixed our show. Andres Cardona is our video producer. We get additional support from Alex Kutzniat-Sova and Ali McPherson. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Enrique Montalvo is our executive producer. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Maya Pope-Chappelle is director of content and audience development. Courtney Coop is head of original programming. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. And I'm Leah Smart. Thanks for coming with me, and I'll see you next week.